Welcome to the week of March 30th for macroeconomics. First and foremost, I hope each of you is staying safe and also looking out for the welfare of your family, friends, and neighbors. I'm confident together we'll get through this. If you have any questions or problems about the course materials or other matters related to MCPHS University, please email me. I'll do everything I can to support you. This week we'll focus on fiscal policy. If you've been watching the news, you will be aware that the federal government plans a massive stimulus package in an attempt to help reduce the negative impacts. So many people and firms feel due to the coronavirus. We see a steady withdrawal of firms and people from the economy, and that in turn has set record unemployment numbers. Over 3 million people filed for unemployment last week, and it's sure to have a big impact on the overall economy. So this week, I'd like you to review Chapter 13 on fiscal policy. I've posted some slides here and have a short recorded lecture. And I'd also like you to take a look at the videos I've posted on fiscal policy, a couple of short videos. And then after you've done that, you can do a graded assignment on fiscal policy. And then the discussion board question also deals with the fiscal policy stimulus package that was just passed. And by the time you're reviewing this, hopefully has been signed into law. So there's a couple of articles here about what's in the stimulus package. And I've asked you to answer a few questions in the discussion board. I'd like you to do that by Thursday evening. And I'd like you to respond to one or more of your colleagues by Sunday evening. So it's the same routine every week. Review the posted materials and videos, participate in the discussion board, and then complete the graded assignment. And if you do those, then you won't have to worry about your grade, and hopefully you'll get some good learnings out of the materials. So the timing couldn't be better in terms of the course and the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in as a country, which is one where the economy has all of a sudden come to a massive slowdown. And so to try to counteract that, the federal government is using fiscal policy as a means to try to stimulate activity by giving a big stimulus into the economy, estimated $2 trillion. So some of you may be getting a tax or a check. Many people in the economy will, and businesses will get some businesses will get some type of financial assistance as well. All of this is expansionary fiscal policy and a hope to get activity moving in the economy again. So we'll take a look at that, but before we take a look at that, we're going to talk about the basics of fiscal policy. And we'll look at what's expansionary fiscal policy and what's contractionary fiscal policy. And then we'll have a chance to look at what is the US fiscal policy today. So in addition to that, we'll refer back to the question about the multiplier effect, which we looked at last week, this issue of automatic stabilizers, take a look at the public debt, and then we'll. So let's take a look at what is fiscal policy. And basically, when we talk about fiscal policy, it refers to government spending and taxation, and it's carried out for our discussion by the president and Congress. In fact, state and local governments also carry out fiscal policy too. But for our discussion, we're going to focus in on the federal government. So government spends money to provide goods and services, and in this particular case, the government's spending money to actually stimulate activity by consumers and firms. And the government pays for those by taxation, and if they don't have enough taxes to cover the spending, then they go out and borrow. And as many of you know, the US government has found itself with a massive federal deficit, over $20 trillion, and certainly this latest round of stimulus packages will add to the national debt. So fiscal policy ties into the national economic goals we've talked about all semester. So the national economic goals are growth, growing GDP, price stability, and full employment. And up until the coronavirus shock to the economy, what we were seeing is really a unprecedented 10-year period in the US economy where Jobs were being added every month. The economy was growing slowly but steadily, and prices were also very stable. So with the coronavirus, COVID-19 shock to the economy, we know that the unemployment rate is going to go up significantly. We've been seeing the unemployment rate hover around 3.5, 3.7%. It most assuredly will go well above that, 7, 10, maybe 15%. Hopefully that's a short-term situation. Hopefully this shock is something that we can get under control in a reasonable period of time, and the economy will get back to functioning. But at this point, we're dealing with uncertainty. This is uncharted territory, and we don't really know how long the virus is going to hang around and how long the economy will be impacted by it. So one of the things that policymakers have been doing really since the Great Depression is to try to use fiscal policy as a countermeasure. So when the economy is in a downturn, as it most certainly is right now, then they try to use an expansionary fiscal policy to try to either increase spending, which is what's going on right now, or decrease taxation, which is not on the table right now, but could be in the foreseeable future as a means to put money into the economy so that people and firms will participate in the economy. So since the Great Depression, some, and I underscore the word some, economists believe that fiscal policy could be used as counter-cyclical. And certainly right now we're seeing that being carried out, that we are seeing fiscal policy being used in an unprecedented way. $2 trillion stimulus package to try to get people back to work, to get the economy moving again. Hopefully it'll be effective. We really don't know until sometime afterwards. So where does federal government get its money? It really gets its money primarily from individuals, from individual income taxes and Social Security taxes. It also raises some, but really a relatively minor amount of its overall receipts from corporate income taxes. And then there's some other miscellaneous things like tariffs, but they're really relatively small. So when we look at the overall federal budget of about $3 trillion, give or take a couple hundred million, individual income taxes and payroll taxes, which is also Social Security, that accounts for roughly 80% of the total tax. Corporate income tax is about 9 to 10%, and then the other stuff is relatively minor. This is just a different depiction of the same. Okay. So we talk about taxes, you're going to hear the term regressive, progressive, and proportional. So regressive taxes are taxes where a larger percentage of income is paid at lower income levels. So for example, sales tax. Typically people who have low incomes spend most of their money on consumption. And as a result, if you look at, let's say that hypothetically everything had a sales tax of 5%. So if I made $30,000 a year, I'd be paying a 5% tax rate on if the sales tax rate was 5%. Let's say that the person who's making 100,000 only spends half of his or her income. So essentially their tax rate is not as high. It's only 5% on half of their income, because the rest of the income they don't use to consume. And so what we see with regressive taxation is that people at lower income levels pay a higher percentage of their total income for that particular tax. So sales tax, Social Security tax, real estate tax, those are all regressive taxes. Progressive tax is the higher income level, the higher percentage of your income is paid towards that. So the federal income tax has historically been a progressive tax. And proportional tax is you pay the same percentage irrespective of your income level. So the Massachusetts income tax is a proportional tax. So of the money that the federal government takes in plus what they borrow, that's what they spend. So as I mentioned before, they were taking in 3.1 trillion. spending $3.9 trillion in 2015. And those numbers change a little bit every year, but that's kind of the dimension that we're looking at. And if you look at what they're actually spending the money on, federal government spends most of it in three areas: health, which Medicare, Medicaid, veteran services, it's about 27%. Social Security and unemployment, mostly Social Security, it's about 34%, and the military is about 17%. And then the rest of it is relatively small as a percentage of the total. The biggest item actually is interest on the debt, which could become a big problem for the federal government over time. But you can see education 2%, energy 1%, science less than 1%, and so forth. So when the federal government spends more than it takes in taxation, it runs a deficit. And we've been running a deficit really since 2001, since Bill Clinton left office. And those deficits have been adding to the national debt. So every year that we run a deficit, that adds to that $20 trillion that we owe. And the stimulus package really was not budgeted, so that will go directly to the national debt. So the government has to go out and borrow money. They borrow from individuals, corporations, financial institutions, and foreign entities or foreign governments also buy the debt, but not directly from the federal government. They buy it through third parties. So if we're going to use fiscal policy as a means to influence the economy towards our three main economic goals, then the thinking is that we'd like to see fiscal policy as being counter-cyclical. And essentially what that means is that during times of expansion, we want the fiscal policy to be either neutral or slightly contractionary. And during downturns, we want the federal government or the fiscal policy to be expansionary. So let's define what that means. Expansionary policy is basically either an increase in government spending or a decrease in taxation. And that's what we're seeing right now in the federal government. And it seeks to stimulate production and increase activity in the economy by consumers and by businesses. That's the goal of expansionary fiscal policy. We use it extensively in response to the financial crisis and Great Recession of 2008. There were a bunch of acts that went in stimulus, and we're going to see the same thing again. We're living through the same thing as we speak right now. It's not going to be the same programs, and it's not going to go to the same groups of people, but it is all designed to stimulate the economy by putting money in the hands of firms and individuals in the U.S. economy. Contractionary fiscal policy would be either a decrease in government spending or an increase in taxes. And typically we would see this during periods of economic prosperity, and this would give us an opportunity to pay off the national debt. And so we really missed the opportunity in the last 10 years, unfortunately. But and one of the reasons is it's politically difficult to have contractionary fiscal policy. There are very few people who want to see increased income taxes and or a cut in the federal spending around Medicare or around Social Security or around national defense. And so these things become very politically difficult to do. And so politicians tend to kick the can down the road, if you will. So last week we talked about the multiplier effect. That was in chapter 11. And basically what that says is that the stimulus, so this $2 trillion stimulus that we're seeing put into the economy, we're hoping that will multiply several times. So it'll have more of an impact than just simply the $2 trillion that gets injected into the economy. And so we've talked about how that works. One of the other problems that comes out of deficit spending and national debt is that we may over time see a crowding out. That is, as the federal government goes in and borrows more and more money and that causes interest rates to go up, that may force private firms out of the market. Another thing that's talked about in chapter 13 is discretionary fiscal policy. And these are change in tax policies or spending in response to fluctuations in the business cycle. So we just saw a big discretionary injection into the economy. And the other part of fiscal policy is what's called automatic stabilizers. These are things that are built into the law that lawmakers don't have to do. So, for example, as you make more money, your rate of taxes goes up. As the economy goes into a recession, unemployment insurance kicks in, and other stable food stamps and housing vouchers tend to automatically increase. And those are all intended to mitigate the downturn or slow down the upswings. So the goal of stabilization is to influence the amount of spending in production in the economy. And the goal is not to have wide swings in our economy. We'd like the economy to be moving forwards slowly and steadily so that it's a sustainable movement forward. We don't want to see these fast and quick increases or steep declines, because both of those create problems. And so stabilizers are intended to help keep the bandwidth relatively narrow on the upswing and on the downswing. So here's a list of the stabilizers I was talking about. So the Great Depression exerted a huge impact on macroeconomics. Really, before the Great Depression, the idea was that policymakers did not believe it was their role to interfere or intervene in the economy by using fiscal and monetary policy. Rather, they thought the economy would be self-correcting over time. And so when at the onset of the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover sat back and said, the economy will correct itself over time. The downturns being exaggerated, the media is blowing things out of proportion, etc. Some of the same language you've heard recently in the news. And so when we got deeply into the Great Depression, people started to look for solutions, and President Roosevelt, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, listened to an economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes, and Keynesian economics really was developed during the Great Depression. And basically, for the first time, policymakers decided it really was an experiment to use fiscal and monetary policy as a means to try to stimulate the economy to move out of the Great Depression. And really, since that time, we've been using fiscal and monetary policy as a means to help move economies towards their major economic goals. So fiscal policy is conducted by the government, by the Congress and President. And they use taxation and government spending as a means to do that. So we've talked about budget deficits and surpluses. And we've talked about the Great Depression a little bit, and the macroeconomic adjustment process that came out of that. So the Keynesian view of fiscal policy really is that we should be countercyclical, that if we're in a downturn, that we should deficit spend, we should increase spending, perhaps lower taxes. And when the economy is moving forward in a robust fashion, it's the time to have a budget surplus, perhaps raise taxes, lower spending, and try to pay down the debt that you incurred during the downturns. So this is where we are right now. We're trying to combat a shock to the system that really is going to cause a significant recession, and hopefully for a short period of time. But we really don't know at this point. So if we have periods of high inflation, we would have the counter-cyclical would be to have contraction or fiscal policy. And we did see that in the 1980s. The deficit and the surpluses, as we spend more than we take in, that's a deficit, and that adds to the national debt. So we were making progress toward the end of 2017, and then when Trump gets elected, he gives a big tax cut to corporations and high-income individuals. And even before this shock to our system, the deficits were ballooning again. And so very unfortunate time for this to happen economically. And of course, the bigger issue, of course, is public health. But there is an economic impact, and so this is going to put a big strain on the federal deficit and will most assuredly increase the national debt, probably to 25 trillion or more in a relatively short period of time. Okay, so that was my brief lecture on fiscal policy. So the other thing that, a couple of other things as you move forward with the week of March 30th assignments is take a look at these videos I've posted. I think these will be helpful to help you understand fiscal policy. There's a great assignment on fiscal policy. I believe it's 20 questions, total of 40 points. And then I'm asking you to do a discussion board question. I've linked 2 articles on the most recent $2 trillion stimulus. Take a look at those. You may find some other articles that are helpful, but essentially what I want you to do is to answer these questions. Why is the federal government taking such a dramatic and historic step to stimulate the economy? How effective do you believe the steps they're taking will be in helping the economy? And are there other things the federal government should be doing to help people in the overall economy? All right, so please get in touch with me if you have any questions, and I hope you're staying safe.